Sarah Mitchell's heels clicked against the polished hardwood floors of the Portland Museum of Art as she made her final rounds. The setting sun cast long shadows through the west-facing windows, creating an interplay of light and shadow that would have been perfect for their upcoming contemporary photography exhibition. At 42, she had spent the last 12 years building the museum's reputation through carefully curated shows that balanced commercial appeal with artistic integrity. Her phone vibrated against the desk. Another text from David. Big breakthrough on the Henderson case. Working late with the team. Don't wait up. Sarah set the phone face down, a gesture that had become routine over the past year. The frequency of these messages had increased since David's promotion to senior partner at Mitchell & Associates 3 years ago. Though lately, they carried a different weight she couldn't quite name. Running her fingers through her shoulder-length, blonde hair, Sarah gathered her belongings and nodded goodbye to Carl, the night security guard who had worked there even longer than she had. The drive home in her 3-year-old Volvo took her through the familiar streets of Portland, past the coffee shops and boutiques that had sprung up in the 15 years since she and David had chosen this city to build their life together. Their Victorian home in the West Hills stood dark, except for the porch light. Sarah had programmed the smart home system to create the illusion of occupancy, lights turning on and off in different rooms throughout the evening. It was a security measure, she'd told David, though sometimes she wondered if she did it more for herself, to pretend someone was waiting for her return. The quarterly law firm dinner at Andina was an event Sarah usually enjoyed. The Peruvian restaurant's private room hummed with conversation as associates and partners discussed cases and office politics over pisco sours and ceviche. But tonight, something felt off. Sarah watched as Jessica Barnes, a third-year associate, leaned across the table to show David something on her phone. Jessica's dark curls fell forward, brushing against David's shoulder as they both laughed at whatever was on the screen. At 34, Jessica had quickly made herself indispensable to the firm's biggest cases, her Yale law degree and quick wit earning her a spot on the fast track to partnership. The Henderson case is going to make headlines, Tom Peterson, the firm's managing partner, mentioned as he refilled Sarah's wine glass. David and Jessica have been pulling 16-hour days to get ahead of the opposition's strategy. Between you and me, I haven't seen David this energized about a case in years. Sarah took a measured sip of her Malbec, noting how David's body angled toward Jessica as they spoke, how his wedding ring caught the light as he gestured animatedly about something. The curator in her, trained to notice subtle details, to piece together narratives from fragments, began cataloging these moments with professional detachment. The way Jessica's hand lingered on David's arm when she excused herself to the restroom, how David's eyes followed her movement across the room, the inside jokes that seemed to exclude everyone else at the table. Sarah, how's the new exhibition coming along? Linda Peterson asked, but Sarah was watching David check his phone under the table, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he typed a response. The insurance documents had to be somewhere in David's home office. Their carrier needed updated information for the art pieces Sarah had recently inherited from her grandmother, and David always handled the paperwork. As she rifled through his meticulously organized files, a crumpled receipt fluttered to the floor from between 2 folders. The Four Seasons Seattle, dated 2 weeks ago. Executive suite, room service for 2. A bottle of Veuve Clicquot. Sarah stared at the receipt, her mind racing to reconcile this with David's text about the Bar Association conference in Tacoma that same weekend. Her hands trembled as she moved to his laptop. After 15 years of marriage, she knew his patterns. The password was still a variation of their wedding date, with special characters added to meet his firm's security requirements. Outlook opened to his personal email, not his work account. Sarah's curatorial instinct for methodical investigation took over as she began to piece together a timeline. Emails going back 3 years. Photos of intimate dinners, late night, messages discussing their future. Weekend getaways disguised as business trips. And then she saw it. Jessica's RSVP to their upcoming vow renewal ceremony, sent with a private joke about watching the performance of a lifetime. Sarah sat in David's leather chair, her professional composure cracking. The magnitude of the deception overwhelmed her. 3 years of lies layered so carefully that she, who made a living studying details, had missed them all. Through the window, she could see their neighbor walking his dog, the mail carrier, delivering packages, the normal world continuing while hers imploded. Her hand shook as she reached for her phone, scrolling past David's name to her sister's. Emma picked up on the second ring. Em? Sarah's voice sounded strange to her. Own ears, I need you to come over. And bring your laptop. Emma's downtown loft became their command center over the next 6 weeks. The industrial dining table disappeared under printouts, receipts, and timeline charts. Sarah approached the project like a museum exhibition, each piece of evidence carefully dated and annotated, building a narrative that couldn't be disputed. Look at this, Emma said, pushing her reading glasses up her nose as she examined credit card statements. Every time he said he was at the firm's Seattle office, there are charges from restaurants near Jessica's apartment. Emma, an accountant who specialized in forensic auditing, had taken a week off work to help build their case. Marcus, the museum's head of digital operations, joined their planning sessions after hours. The presentation system at Cascade Mountain Lodge is basic, but I can override it remotely, he explained, showing them the technical specifications. Once it starts, they won't be able to stop it without cutting power to the whole building. Sarah stood at Emma's windows, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over Portland. Her reflection showed a woman she barely recognized. Thinner, paler, but somehow stronger. The shock had given way to a cold clarity that surprised her. The red dress arrived, Emma mentioned, pulling up the delivery confirmation. But are you sure about this? It's not too late to just serve him with divorce papers. Sarah turned from the window. He invited his mistress to watch us renew our vows. M. made our marriage the punchline of their private joke. She picked up a photo from the table, David and Jessica at a charity gala 6 months ago, standing closer than colleagues should. I spent 15 years building a life with him. I want him to watch while I tear it down. Marcus looked up from his laptop. The hotel confirmed the final guest count. 217 people will witness this. 217 people will witness the truth, Sarah corrected, her curator's precision asserting itself even now. Cascade Mountain Lodge buzzed with pre-wedding energy. Sarah stood in the grand ballroom, watching the event staff arrange chairs and set up the altar. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed a postcard-perfect view of snow-capped peaks against a clear blue sky. It would have been breathtaking if she could feel anything beyond the dull ache in her chest. Mrs. Mitchell, where would you like the screen positioned? The AV technician's question snapped her back to the present. Center stage, please, and make sure it's large enough to be seen clearly from the back row. Sarah's voice was steady, professional, the same tone she used when directing museum installations. The rehearsal dinner that evening was an exercise in restraint. Sarah watched David work the room, shaking hands with colleagues and charming their friends with practiced ease. She noted how his eyes kept darting to the entrance, his smile widening when Jessica finally arrived in a navy cocktail dress. That probably cost more than most of the museum's junior staff made in a month. Tomorrow will be perfect, David whispered in her ear as they posed for photos, his hand resting on the small of her back. She could smell Jessica's perfume on his collar, something youthful and exotic, like orchids and vanilla. I can't wait to marry you all over again. Sarah smiled up at him, wondering if he could see the knowledge in her eyes, if he could sense the storm brewing behind her calm exterior. It will certainly be memorable, she replied, her words carrying a weight he couldn't yet understand. Later that night, alone in her hotel suite, she'd insisted on separate rooms, citing tradition. Sarah stood before the full-length mirror. Emma helped her out of the cream-colored rehearsal dress, carefully hanging it next to the garment bag that held tomorrow's outfit. Last chance to back out, Emma said softly, meeting Sarah's eyes in the reflection. Sarah shook her head. No, this ends tomorrow. Dawn broke over the Cascades, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of pink and gold. Sarah sat at the vanity in her suite, watching as the makeup artist transformed her into a vision of subtle power. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant updo, her green eyes emphasized with smoky shadow that made them look deeper, almost feline. The photographer is ready for some getting ready shots, the wedding coordinator announced, clipboard in hand. Sarah nodded, maintaining the serene smile she'd perfected over years of gallery openings and donor events. Through the window, she could see guests arriving, their cars winding up the mountain road. A red Tesla pulled into the parking lot, Jessica, arriving early to help with last-minute preparations, no doubt. Sarah watched as the younger woman stepped out, smoothing her champagne-colored dress that could almost pass for bridal. "It's showtime," Emma said softly, unzipping the garment bag to reveal the dress they'd chosen. Not white, not cream, but a deep, rich red that seemed to glow with an inner fire. The silk charmeuse flowed like liquid around Sarah's body as Emma helped her into it, the cut both elegant and devastating. Sarah turned to the full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Gone was the betrayed wife, the woman who had spent weeks crying herself to sleep. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who refused to be made a fool of any longer. "Are you ready?" Emma asked, adjusting the dress's neckline. Sarah met her own gaze in the mirror, feeling a surge of determination that bordered on exhilaration. "I've never been more ready in my life." As they prepared to leave the room, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Systems set. On your cue." She slipped the phone into the hidden pocket Emma had sewn into the dress, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The hallway was filled with the excited chatter of bridesmaids and family members. Sarah moved through them, like a ship cutting through water, her red dress drawing every eye. She could hear the whispers, see the confusion on their faces. This wasn't the blushing bride they had expected. At the end of the hall, David waited to escort her to the ceremony. His face, when he saw her, was a study in conflicting emotions, desire, confusion, and just a flicker of fear. "Sarah," he breathed, "you look incredible. But I thought we agreed on traditional white." She smiled up at him, a predator's smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, David, I think we both know this isn't going to be a traditional ceremony." The ballroom of Cascade Mountain Lodge hummed with anticipation. 200 guests filled the rows of white chairs, their murmurs echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the majestic Cascade Mountains, creating a dramatic backdrop for what was about to unfold. David stood at the altar, handsome in his tailored black tuxedo, a nervous energy radiating from him that guests attributed to the emotion of the day. In the third row, Jessica sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her champagne dress catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. Her eyes darted between David and the entrance, a mixture of excitement and unease evident in her posture. The string quartet began to play, but instead of the traditional wedding march, the first notes of "You Oughta Know" by Alanis Morissette filtered through the room. A collective murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. David's smile faltered, his eyes widening as he recognized the song. And then Sarah appeared. The red dress caught every eye, every breath, every whisper. It moved like liquid fire as she walked down the aisle alone, her steps measured and deliberate. David's face drained of color as she approached, his eyes darting between her dress and Jessica's increasingly pale face. As Sarah reached the altar, she didn't take David's hand. Instead, she turned to face their guests, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the room. "I want to thank you all for coming today. You're here to witness a renewal of vows, but not in the way you might expect." Before anyone could react, the lights dimmed. The large screen behind the altar, meant for displaying romantic photos of the couple, flickered to life. Marcus, hidden in the back with his laptop, gave Sarah a subtle nod. "In my career as a curator," Sarah continued, her voice steady, "I've organized many exhibitions, but this one is special. I call it The Art of Deception, a 3-year study." The first slide appeared, a security camera still of David and Jessica entering the Four Seasons Seattle. Then came email screenshots, receipts, text messages, each piece of evidence presented with a curator's precision, dated and annotated. The gasps and whispers grew louder with each revelation. "While I was planning this ceremony," Sarah said, her eyes scanning the shocked faces of their guests, "my husband and his mistress were planning their own future." "Jessica," she turned to face the woman who was now trying to shrink into her seat, "I believe you RSVP'd to the wrong email. The heart emoji you sent to my husband's private account wasn't quite the formal response we requested. David lunged for Sarah, his face a mask of panic and rage. "Stop this," he hissed, reaching for her arm. "We can talk about this privately." Sarah stepped back, just out of his reach. Her voice, when she spoke, was low, but carried to every corner of the now silent room. "We're done with privacy. David, 3 years of your private conversations with Jessica were enough, don't you think?" The room erupted into chaos. Jessica bolted for the exit, her champagne dress a blur as she pushed past stunned guests. Several of David's law partners were hurriedly checking their phones, no doubt calculating the scandal's impact on their firm. Sarah's voice cut through the commotion one final time. "I spent 15 years building a life with a man who could look me in the eyes every day while loving someone else. Today isn't about renewing vows, it's about breaking them. And, in doing so, I'm setting myself free." She turned to the crowd, many of whom were now standing in shock or outrage. "Thank you all for coming to my liberation party. The bar is open, and yes, it's all on David's credit card. Please, enjoy yourselves. I know I will." With that, Sarah Mitchell walked back down the aisle, leaving behind a crumbling marriage and stepping into an uncertain but authentic future. As she reached the doors, Emma appeared at her side, wrapping a supportive arm around her sister's waist. "Let's get out of here," Emma whispered, guiding Sarah towards the exit as the chaos continued to unfold behind them. The days following, what the local press dubbed the red dress revelation, passed in a whirlwind of headlines and hushed conversations. Sarah had checked into the Heathman Hotel in downtown Portland, where Emma and Marcus took shifts keeping her company and screening her calls. David's voicemails piled up, his tone evolving from pleading to angry to defeated. "Sarah, please, we need to talk. Then, you've ruined everything. And finally, my lawyer will be in touch." Sarah listened to each one with a detached curiosity, as if studying artifacts from a long-lost civilization. The law firm was in full crisis mode. 5 clients had already withdrawn their business, uncomfortable with the publicity. Jessica had taken an indefinite leave of absence, and rumors circulated that she'd fled to her parents' home in Minnesota. On the 3rd morning, as Sarah sipped her coffee and scrolled through the barrage of emails, ranging from supportive friends to opportunistic divorce attorneys, Emma arrived with a determined look on her face. "The Portland Tribune wants an interview," she announced, setting down a bag of fresh pastries. "They're calling you a feminist icon and the face of empowerment in the digital age." Sarah set down her phone, considering. "I'm not an icon, Em. I'm just me, a woman who finally stopped accepting less than she deserved." Emma squeezed her hand. "That's exactly why people are responding to your story. You stood up for yourself in a way many wish they could." As they talked, Sarah felt the first stirrings of an idea, not for revenge this time, but for something constructive, something that could turn this painful chapter into a force for good. 3 months later, Sarah stood in an empty storefront in Seattle's Pioneer Square district. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the hardwood floors and exposed brick walls. The real estate agent chatted enthusiastically about foot traffic and upcoming neighborhood developments. But Sarah was already envisioning something else. Her own gallery. The divorce proceedings were moving forward, albeit contentiously. David, perhaps hoping to salvage what remained of his reputation, had initially agreed to generous terms before backtracking and hiring an aggressive attorney. The Victorian house in Portland's West Hills was in limbo, awaiting a court decision. "It needs work," Marcus said, running his hand along a rough brick wall. He'd driven up from Portland to help her evaluate the space. "But I can see it, Sarah. This could be the start of something amazing." Sarah nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of genuine excitement. "I'm thinking of calling it Phoenix Gallery." "Too on the nose." Marcus grinned. "Maybe a little, but I like it. Rising from the ashes and all that." As they discussed potential renovations and opening exhibitions, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a message from her lawyer. David had finally agreed to a settlement, one that would allow Sarah to keep her retirement account and provide seed money for her new venture. "It's done," she said quietly, showing Marcus the message. He hugged her tightly. "How do you feel?" Sarah took a deep breath. looking around the empty space that held so much potential. Like I'm finally ready to create something that's truly mine. As they left the building, Sarah paused to look at her reflection in the storefront window. The woman looking back at her wasn't the perfectly polished curator of a year ago, nor was she the vengeful bride in red. This Sarah stood taller, her eyes clearer, her smile genuine if a bit tentative. She was a work in progress, much like the empty gallery behind her, full of potential, ready to be filled with new stories and fresh perspectives. "Come on," she said to Marcus. "Let's go celebrate. I think it's time I started enjoying Seattle for myself, don't you?" As they walked towards Pike Place Market, Sarah felt a weight lifting. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it felt full of possibilities. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, Sarah stood in her completed gallery. The renovation had been a labor of love, transforming the raw space into a sleek, modern showcase for art. The opening exhibition, titled Rising, featured works by women artists exploring themes of transformation and rebirth. The red dress that had caused such a sensation hung in a glass case near the entrance, now an art piece itself. Its placard read simply, "The Catalyst, 2025. Sarah had debated including it, but ultimately decided it was an important part of her story, and the gallery's origin. As she made final adjustments to the lighting, her phone buzzed with encouraging messages from Emma and Marcus, who were stuck in traffic but promised to arrive soon. The nervous energy Sarah felt wasn't just about the gallery opening. It was about stepping fully into this new version of herself, one she was still getting to know. The first guests began to arrive, a mix of Seattle art scene regulars, curious locals, and a few familiar faces from Portland. Sarah greeted them with a warmth that surprised her, realizing how much she'd missed genuine human connection during the months of turmoil and transition. As the gallery filled, Sarah caught snippets of conversation about the art, the space, and inevitably, the story behind it all. She overheard one woman say, "Can you believe she started over at 43? It's inspiring." The comment made Sarah pause. She hadn't thought of herself as inspiring. She'd just been doing what she needed to survive. But looking around at the gallery, at the life she'd built from the ashes of her old one, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of pride. The opening night was a success by any measure. Sales had exceeded expectations. Critics were intrigued, and Sarah had made valuable connections in the Seattle art world. As the last guests trickled out, Sarah found herself alone in the gallery, surrounded by the artwork she'd so carefully curated. She walked to the window, looking out at the now familiar streets of Pioneer Square. Seattle had become home, in a way she hadn't anticipated. The city had offered her a fresh start, free from the weight of her past in Portland. Her phone buzzed, not with a message from David this time, but from Michael, a Seattle art collector she'd met during the gallery preparations. He was asking her to dinner later in the week. Sarah smiled, slipping the phone back into her pocket. She wasn't ready to dive into a new relationship, but she was open to the possibility of one, someday. The red dress caught her eye, and she walked over to its display case. It no longer held the power it once did. It was just fabric now, a symbol of a moment past, while she was so much more. Sarah's reflection in the glass overlaid the dress, and she studied herself with the same critical eye she used for art. The past year had left its mark. A few more lines around her eyes, a streak of gray at her temple she'd decided not to color. But there was something else, too. A confidence, a strength that hadn't been there before. As she turned off the lights and prepared to leave, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. The future was unwritten, full of possibilities. She was only beginning to imagine. She had curated this new life with the same care and attention she gave to her exhibitions, selecting pieces that resonated with her true self and discarding those that no longer fit. Locking the gallery door behind her, Sarah stepped out into the Seattle night. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the streets hummed with the energy of a city that never truly slept. As she walked towards her apartment, Sarah realized she was smiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a meeting with potential investors, decisions about upcoming exhibitions, the ongoing process of rebuilding her life. But for now, in this moment, Sarah Mitchell was exactly where she wanted to be, standing on her own 2 feet, the author of her own story. What did you think of the story? Leave a comment and rate this story from 0 to 10. What rating would you give it and why? 2 buttons will appear next to it, one to subscribe, if you haven't already, and the other to watch other interesting stories. Choose one. Thanks for watching this far. See you soon.